It started with small things. A few months back, she mentioned she wanted to renovate the kitchen. I remember nodding and saying something vague, like, let's look into it. That was it. A casual dinner conversation, a passing comment between bites. I figured we'd talk again when we were ready. Instead, I came home a week later to find a design portfolio sprawled across the table and a signed contract already in motion. She waved it off with a smile. It's just the consultation, she said, flipping a page like it was an afterthought. But a week later, a team was already measuring, tapping on walls, and outlining where cabinets would go. When I asked about cost, she blinked. I used the joint card, she said. It's our kitchen. Then came the furniture. One Saturday, she drove off in the morning, saying she was running errands. I spent the day fixing a leak under the bathroom sink and cleaning out the garage. When she returned, a delivery truck followed behind her, carrying new chairs, a designer couch, and a glass coffee table. Boxes labeled with foreign-sounding brands I'd never heard of. I asked if she'd found a great sale. No, she said, brushing her hair back. It's all on credit. 0% for 6 months. Don't worry about it. That phrase, don't worry about it, kept echoing through our home like some kind of spell she'd cast to justify every surprise. Each new object she brought in had already been chosen, ordered, delivered, and installed. I began to notice changes in our bank statements. Not the big numbers, those were obvious, but the subtle, recurring charges. Services I hadn't subscribed to. New online tools. A social media ad campaign linked to her boutique. When I checked the settings, I saw my name listed under the boutique's PayPal profile as a co-owner. I hadn't signed anything, hadn't agreed to it. She even updated the boutique's website to list both of us as co-founders. A flattering photo of the two of us smiling at some summer market. I remember the day we took it. I thought it was just for Instagram. But now, it was being used as part of her branding, proof of a team effort that, in truth, was entirely her own doing. One evening, I checked our joint credit card statement and saw a $1,200 charge from a luxury women's clothing site. When I asked about it, she barely looked up from her phone. It's for a shoot. Brand partnership, she mumbled, scrolling through notifications. I didn't even bother asking what brand or what kind of shoot. I already knew the answer would land somewhere between vague and dismissive. Still, I waited. I told myself it wasn't worth fighting over. Maybe it was just a phase, ambition kicking in, trying to make something of her business. I wanted to support her. I always had. But I started to feel more like a silent investor than a partner. The kind of investor who has no access to the books, no voice in the planning, and no idea what the return might look like. Then, 3 days ago, she sent me a notification from the bank. Your account ending in 93XX is now linked to Storefront Pro as a primary card. Just like that, my name was now attached to every purchase her boutique made. Not even a conversation or a question. Just a done deal. That night, I barely slept. I kept turning things over in my head, wondering when this shift had happened. When did our decisions stop being shared? I wasn't oblivious. I had seen her change. Her confidence had grown. Her tone, when she spoke to me, had changed. But I told myself she was just excited, perhaps a bit overzealous. I was trying to be patient. Then came the dinner. It was ordinary, grilled chicken, asparagus, and a glass of wine. We were sitting across from each other, the glow of the dining room lamp between us. I set my fork down and said, gently, maybe we should slow down the spending. Things are getting a little heavy, and we should probably make these choices together. It's not just your call. She looked up slowly, a slice of asparagus speared on her fork. Her eyes glinted, and for a second, I thought she was going to agree. Maybe offer an apology, a nod, a promise to be more collaborative. But instead, she leaned back in her chair, tilted her head, and laughed. A full, open laugh. Like I had said, something naive or absurd. Then came the words, I don't need your permission. She said it lightly, but her tone didn't soften it. It wasn't a joke. It was a statement. One she believed with her whole heart. My stomach twisted. I didn't respond. Didn't argue. I just reached for my glass, took a sip, and looked at her for a long moment. Inside, something slipped into place. It wasn't rage or shock. It was colder than that. A quiet click, like a switch had been flipped. I nodded. Fine. If she didn't need my permission, then she wouldn't need my involvement either. I finished my dinner in silence. I complimented the seasoning. Asked if she wanted more wine. She shook her head, already typing away on her phone. The rest of the night passed like any other. Dishes, a bit of TV, separate showers. But in my mind, I was already packing boxes she hadn't noticed. Because I wasn't about to yell, I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a dramatic reaction. I was going to do what she had done. Make decisions without asking or informing. The difference? Mine would matter more than she ever expected. And I would start tonight. I waited until she fell asleep. It didn't take long. Her nightly ritual of melatonin gummies, a glass of rose, and half-watched reality TV guaranteed she'd be out before midnight. Once her breathing settled into that soft rhythm, I stepped out of bed and padded to the living room. My laptop waited on the dining table, along with a growing folder of suspicions I'd gathered quietly but thoroughly. For weeks, I'd been saving receipts, screenshots, and messages. I wasn't certain why at the time. Now, it felt like preparation. I opened the folder marked Business Docs, something she had insisted I help organize when she first launched the boutique. At the time, it felt like a team effort. She'd handed me a glass of whiskey and said, "I'm good with branding. You handle the boring paperwork." I didn't know then that boring paperwork meant binding liability. I clicked through files, LLC registration, operating agreement, bank account applications. There it was. My name. Co-founder. Account co-signer. Joint responsibility for tax filings, loans, and vendor contracts. I hadn't thought much about it when we filed. She said it would make things easier. You trust me, don't you? I had. Foolishly. But now those decisions gave me leverage. I turned to the next set, domain registration, hosting services, SSL certificates. All paid through my primary email. Even the customer service recovery email ended up in my inbox. The domain itself? I bought it with my card 2 years ago during a Black Friday sale. She had no idea. She'd gotten comfortable. Careless. Next came the boutique's social media business suite. She was logged in on her tablet. I picked it up, swiped it, and checked the access permissions. All of them were linked to the email account I had created for her when she started. I never revoked my admin rights. It was strange, seeing just how much control I had, but had never exercised. I had built the framework so she could fly. She'd used the lift to ignore the air traffic. I opened another tab and pulled up my bank portal. Time to act. First, I created a new personal account. One without joint access, without her as a beneficiary. I transferred my payroll deposit. Then I scrolled through the list of recurring charges and began shutting down the services. Canva Premium, Shopify Pro, auto renewal for her calendar app. Every subscription tied to my name was disabled or reassigned. I wasn't cutting her off. I was simply stepping away. Then I logged into the boutique's business bank account. Thanks to the LLC agreement, any significant financial decision requires the mutual consent of both parties. She had never honored that clause, but it existed in black and white. I drafted a letter addressed to our attorney of record, formally requesting a temporary suspension of account activity until an internal audit was completed. I CC'd the bank and included a scan of our original agreement with the relevant section highlighted. By the time I hit send, the company's funds were under review. Next came the domain. I logged into the registrar's dashboard and activated a temporary hold. Nothing dramatic, just a status update to maintenance, which immediately replaced the boutique's homepage with a blank white screen and a polite message. Technical work in progress. We'll be back soon. It looked harmless. To her, though, it would feel like a shutdown. I closed the laptop, leaned back in the chair, and stared at the ceiling. There was no surge of power, just stillness. I had stepped away from a ship that had already sailed without a map, and now I was watching it drift, no longer responsible for steering it back. In the morning, she was up early, bustling in the kitchen, Bluetooth speaker playing one of her influencer playlists. I poured myself a coffee, checked my phone without expression. She was talking to someone on speakerphone, likely a vendor. I caught fragments. No, it's just a tech issue. Yeah, the site was working yesterday. Let me check with my web guy. Web guy? That would be me. She looked confused, brows furrowed, tapping away at her laptop as she refreshed her boutique site over and over. When she noticed me watching, she flashed a tight smile. Looks like a server thing. Probably hosting, she muttered, almost to herself. I sipped my coffee. Oh, she added. Did you see a weird email from the bank? Something about our business account? I nodded. I initiated a review. Clause 5B requires both partners to approve major expenses. It hadn't been followed. She blinked. You're serious? I nodded again. Just protecting the integrity of the business. She laughed nervously. Okay, well, I didn't think you'd actually. Never mind. We'll talk later. But there was nothing left to discuss. I wasn't punishing her. I was just adjusting to the same level of autonomy she had claimed. That afternoon, I checked the balance on my new account. My paycheck had landed. Clean, untouched. The boutique account, meanwhile, had frozen. At lunch, she was pacing with her phone pressed to her ear, alternating between agitated calls and awkward justifications. No, we're not closed. It's just a pause, a temporary glitch. By evening, the influencer group chat she often bragged about had gone silent. I noticed her opening her phone to the same message multiple times, rereading a single line from one of her partners. You need to fix this fast. I have 3 launches depending on you. She didn't say a word to me that night. She made her dinner quietly, as if the air had shifted and she couldn't figure out why it felt different. But I knew. The power dynamic had changed, and she had no idea just how much more I was prepared to reclaim. 2 mornings later, she burst through the front door, breathless, a to-go latte still steaming in one hand. Her heels clicked across the hardwood with the kind of urgency that usually followed news she hadn't anticipated. I was at the dining table, reviewing emails on my laptop, headphones loosely hanging around my neck. She didn't speak right away, but I could feel the tension. It came in waves, tight jaw, rapid blinking, restless movements. She stood in front of me, arms crossed, one hip jutting slightly like she needed to anchor herself. Did you cancel the kitchen work? Her voice wasn't raised, but it carried that strained pitch she usually reserved for customer service agents. I didn't bother asking how she found out. Probably a voicemail from the contractor or a forwarded invoice demanding payment. I contacted them. I replied evenly. Told them the terms in the contract require both signatures to proceed. Her lips parted, a small exhale escaping. You're really doing this? The paperwork was clear, I said, returning my attention to the screen. They shouldn't have begun demolition with only one authorization. She turned away with a harsh sigh, pacing to the living room. For a moment, she looked like she might launch into a tirade. Instead, she called someone on speaker. I recognized the contractor's voice immediately. She says her husband's freezing everything, he barked. We either get full payment or the whole job halts. She needs to figure this out today or there's going to be a cancellation fee. She hung up mid-sentence, fingers shaking as she tapped on her phone. I waited, finishing my coffee. Later that afternoon, while she was buried in salvaging vendor relationships, I walked to the leasing office downstairs. The manager, Joseph, greeted me with a professional smile. I handed him a form I'd drafted the night before, an official request to terminate our joint lease agreement by the end of the month. Joseph raised an eyebrow. She already signed? He asked, flipping through the pages. I nodded. 2 weeks ago, I left it with our mail for her to process with the usual bills. She signed it and mailed it back to you. Didn't read it. Joseph shrugged. Well, you're good to go then. Just make sure the keys are turned in by the last day. That evening, while she paced around with a tablet in one hand and a notebook filled with crossed-out plans in the other, I began quietly sorting through my things. I avoided dramatic gestures. No boxes in the hallway. No taped labels. Just slow, steady extraction. I had already secured a studio. Something modest, 10 minutes across town, tucked above a cafe and overlooking a courtyard. The lease was signed in my name only. Utilities arranged. Internet installed. I kept it quiet. Midweek, I scheduled the movers for Friday, during her influencer brunch. A 2-hour window was all I needed. That morning, I took the day off. She left the apartment in a rush, clutching a ring light and a stack of sponsored product boxes, oblivious to the suitcase by the door. By noon, I was gone. Every item I removed had been chosen carefully, things I bought, things I inherited, objects that meant something to me. I didn't take anything out of spite. I took only what was mine. Before I left, I placed a single sheet of paper on the dining table, folded once. On it, I had typed, "This is the last joint decision I'll be part of. You'll find the apartment keys with the building manager. Email for anything urgent." No signature. No farewell. I drove to the dealership next. The car she used daily, technically registered in my name, had grown into another extension of her freedom. She never asked to drive it. I never contested it. But it had always been mine. That afternoon, I handed over the title, adjusted the insurance, and traded it in for a more practical hybrid. When she returned home, the empty space in the garage would be waiting like a quiet answer. By evening, I sat on the couch in my new place, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. A soft hum of city life floated through the window. I ate dinner alone, not in sadness, but in clarity. Across town, her messages began lighting up my phone. First, a string of question marks. Then, "Where's the car?" Followed by, "What's going on?" I didn't respond. Instead, I turned my attention to the boutique's administrative dashboard. The email chain with PayPal was growing. Their compliance team had flagged the business account for verification due to inconsistencies in ownership documentation. They had paused all incoming transactions pending an internal investigation. I forwarded the whole chain to our business attorney, noting that the co-founder had not received consent for platform integrations. I kept my language formal, clean, and deliberate. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was simply enforcing boundaries she had spent months ignoring. Later that night, a voicemail rolled in. Her voice was thinner now, the edges of panic peeking through the words. "Hey, I don't know what's going on, but I really need to talk. The boutique's frozen, the site's down, and now you've moved? Can we just sit down, please?" I didn't return it either, because sitting down implies there's still a table between us. But that table was gone, along with the foundation she thought she could keep standing while sawing through its legs. By the end of the week, her Instagram page, usually a curated symphony of brand colors, filters, and clever captions, turned into a broadcast of crisis control. The boutique's homepage remained stuck on the technical work in progress screen, and every time she refreshed it on her phone, her expression tensed just a little more. Gone were the endless selfies and styled product photos. Now, it was blank story posts, a few text-only updates asking followers to stay tuned, and a noticeable dip in likes and comments. She tried improvising. "Our site is temporarily down for upgrades," she announced in a pinned comment. "We're preparing for something big." Her tone was forced, like someone performing in a play where the script had vanished mid-scene. The comments under the post didn't help. "Still waiting on my order from last week. DM'd you twice. Can't check out. Are you shutting down?" I read through them with detached curiosity, sipping tea at my new place while the city outside drizzled quietly. It was a strange sensation, watching a structure I had once helped build now wobble under its weight, because it had never really been reinforced from both sides. Saturday, around noon, her name appeared again on my screen. She'd called 6 times earlier in the week, left 2 voicemails, none of which I opened. This time, she didn't even wait for the line to ring out. She sent a text. "We need to fix this. I can't keep going like this." A string of screenshots followed, order cancellations, refund requests, and a furious influencer demanding compensation for a sponsored post that never went live. She followed up 10 minutes later. "I just got an email from PayPal. The business account is under review. They won't let me withdraw anything. What's going on?" I let the phone sit face down beside me. She called again. When I finally answered, her voice was sharp but uncertain, like a tightrope walker realizing the line beneath her was fraying. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Freezing the business account? Taking down the site? That's sabotage." I stayed quiet for a moment, letting her words settle. "The LLC requires consensus for platform integrations and major financial moves," I said calmly. "It's all in the operating agreement. You used my credentials. You made unilateral decisions. This isn't just some hobby. I depend on that revenue." "And you made that very clear," I replied, "by tying your entire operation to my name and assets without consulting me. You said you didn't need my permission. I'm acting accordingly." She let out a shaky breath. "You know that's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant," I corrected. "You wanted independence. You've got it." There was a pause on the other end, as if she expected me to walk back my position. When silence met silence, she hung up. Hours later, another message arrived. Longer this time. Rambling. "Look, I was stressed that day. I shouldn't have said what I did. I didn't think you'd actually take it personally. We've always managed to figure things out. This whole thing is getting out of hand. The boutique's taken years to build. I'm under pressure from collaborators, suppliers, and customers. Can we please just talk? In person?" It ended with a soft plea. "At least return the website access. We can come to an agreement." I read it twice before responding. Agreements are for partnerships. That only works when both people are seen, when both have a voice. She replied instantly. Then let's rebuild that. My following message was slower and more deliberate. I'm finishing things officially. Without noise. Without drama. Just like you handled decisions when you didn't think my involvement mattered. There were no more replies that night. On Monday, her boutique supplier flagged a missing invoice on their dashboard. Apparently, PayPal's freeze had locked up every dollar in the business account. Shipments were paused indefinitely. One of her longtime vendors sent a stern notice. Outstanding balances must be cleared within 72 hours, or your wholesale terms will be revoked. It wasn't hard to trace the escalation. Everything she had built rested on interconnected wires, web domains, banking logins, vendor platforms, and communication channels. And most of those wires were once tied through me. She hadn't noticed them while they supported her. Now that they were untethered, her structure trembled with each disconnected strand. A week ago, she laughed in my face and claimed independence. Now, she sat beneath the collapsing scaffolding of that illusion. In the evening, I received one more message. A screenshot of her boutique's homepage with a maintenance screen, followed by a final line. Tell me what I have to do to get this back. I didn't answer. She had already done everything required. She showed me exactly what I meant in her world, and I returned the gesture. A month passed. Enough time for late-night negotiations, tears behind locked doors, panic calls to legal contacts, and plenty of face-saving social media posts trying to rewrite the narrative. She switched from damage control to sympathy campaigns, trying to rally support. I watched it all unfold from the quiet of my new apartment, seated on a creaky leather chair I'd picked up secondhand, a cup of black coffee in hand. Then it arrived. A letter from the registrar's office confirming the completion of the LLC's share distribution. The final clause, initiated by her, had been processed. My stake had been formally relinquished, the company had been dissolved under our original structure, and a new business entity had been filed under her sole name. Attached was a final ledger, clean and precise. She had assumed the boutique as a whole. Along with it, every unpaid vendor fee, frozen account, disputed invoice, and severed contract. The email server, which was previously tied to my original hosting, had expired. The site domain had transferred hands weeks ago, sold, quietly, through a private listing to a third-party reseller who reached out the day after my lock was lifted. He offered a reasonable price. I accepted without hesitation. The boutique's homepage has now been redirected to a travel blog in Portuguese. I received an alert from her former marketing team. Apparently, she had tried to migrate operations under a different name. A fresh launch, a new logo, and the same inventory. But the foundation remained cracked. Without platform access, without supplier agreements, without infrastructure, she was rebuilding on sand. I opened a box labeled Miscellaneous, Living Room, and pulled out a photo. It was us, 2 years ago, standing behind the boutique's first pop-up stall. I remembered the heat that day, the way she'd brushed a smudge of chalkboard paint from my cheek, laughing. Back then, it felt like we were building something together, something real. But somewhere along the way, that version of us had been replaced and swapped for roles where one led and the other merely enabled. She had wanted freedom. I had granted it fully, without ceremony. There were no confrontations. No key thrown across the room in a final blaze of emotion. Just a series of emails, quiet paperwork, a digital trail that ended with her signature and a blinking cursor. My phone buzzed. A message from her. Simple, short. Are you really done? I stared at the screen for a long while, then typed back. I respected your logic. Followed it to the end. Read. No reply. That night, I walked to the corner store for groceries. The air was brisk, the city humming with its usual rhythm, distant horns, the clink of glassware from apartment windows, a soft jazz melody escaping a second-story bar. I walked slowly, letting the rhythm settle in. Inside the store, the clerk greeted me by name. I had only been there 3 times, but he remembered. Strange, how being seen, even briefly, could leave an imprint. Back home, I unpacked the bag. Eggs, bread, a bottle of olive oil, a bag of coffee beans, ordinary items, but chosen deliberately. I put everything away, cleaned the counter, and stood for a moment, just watching the stillness. No swirling arguments were waiting in the next room. Just quiet. She had always assumed silence meant weakness. that stepping away was surrender. But in truth, silence was the loudest thing I'd ever delivered. The boutique? Gone. The car? Traded. The apartment? Empty. My presence in her ecosystem? Rewritten as absence. And that absence now echoed louder than any confrontation ever could. I didn't scorch the earth. I simply stepped off it and let her taste the gravity of her declarations. She once said, "I don't need your permission." Turns out, she meant it. And I honored that, without hesitation, without noise, without looking back, just as she requested.
Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.